welcome to Lacabra Talks. I'm Marie. I'm with Eddie Morgan, and I've got Derek Newton, from the founder of Highland Palestine. Hi, Derek. How are you?
Great, thanks. Doing well, yeah.
So, just wanted to talk about Highland Palestine. So, Derek, just wanted to talk about why you founded it and how you went about it.
Sure. Well, I think really the origins of Highland Palestine go back quite a long time before it actually started, really to the early 2000s, when the time of the 9/11 and the subsequent assault on Afghanistan and then the war on Iraq. So in the Highlands, we had a group that came together that called itself the Highland Coalition for Justice, Not War, which I and my partner at the time got very involved with. And I became kind of the secretary of that group and started publishing a newsletter, which originally was printed and sent through the post, but over time became a sort of email newsletter. So that gave me the idea of doing that, really. The other thing on a personal note was that at that time I started working from time to time in Amman in Jordan. I was sent there by Huddersfield University that I worked for at the time. And I was there in 2002, in April 2002, when Israel went into the Jenin refugee camp and committed what's been called the Jenin massacre, which is an event very, very similar to what we're witnessing today in Gaza. The wholesale destruction of housing and demolition of housing, dozens of people killed, and it's never really been established exactly how many people did die there. But what affected me was the way that the people that I'd met in Amman, my students and some of the other people I'd met, how they reacted to it. And it was really the first time that I'd experienced an event like that from, as it were, within the region where it was taking place. And people were really profoundly shocked. And I could feel it from the difference in the way my students were with me. They were much quieter, less interested, less able to discuss things. And so that had quite a profound impact on my thinking about Palestine and the need to do something about it, really. But it took me some time, really, from then to really get organized, because I was doing a lot of work, as well as going to Jordan. I was actually doing a lot of work in China at the time. But over a period of about 10 years, I became very strongly of the view that there were a lot of people in the Highlands who had quite a lot of experience with Palestine, and also had a lot of people who had quite deep sympathy for Palestine, but there wasn't any kind of organizational expression of that. So in 2011, at the end of 2011, I actually went to Palestine and met up with a friend of mine who'd been going for a number of years to Beit Sahur. So I spent some time traveling around with him and experiencing what was going on. And in particular, experienced working with a group called Tayush, which more or less means together. And it's basically an Israeli-based organization that work with vulnerable communities in the Hebron Hills, helping to protect them and from attacks by settlers and so on. And I went out with my friend with Tayush and experienced it firsthand, and experienced confrontation with some very vicious looking settlers in fact. So that kind of really spurred me on to wanting to do something about it. So in 2012, an opportunity arose because the Mull Theatre company were going around the Highlands with a version of a play based on the diary of Rachel Corrie. And they came to Eden Court, and I distributed some leaflets at Eden Court inviting people to a meeting, for which I was thrown off the press, which I thought was pretty remarkable, given that I was 60-odd-year-old bloke at this time. I thought, oh, I've still got it. I can still cause trouble here, you know. So anyway, we had an initial meeting, and then I invited my friend Ron that I'd visited in Batesahall to come and give a talk about what this work that he'd been doing with this group called Tayush. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that was the point where I began trying to gather people's email addresses and contact lists and so on. We still had a list of contacts from the Coalition for Justice Not War group. So I wrote to all those people and asked them whether they'd be interested in getting on a mailing list to do with Palestine. So that was kind of the nucleus of where we started from. So the initial idea was just really to have a way of networking people through a mailing list, which would act as a newsletter, updating people about what was actually happening in Palestine. And partly it was based on the fact that Mazen Kumsir, who is coming to the Highlands in a few weeks' time, he was actually doing that himself. He was putting out a newsletter which had a lot of information about what was going on in Palestine. So I thought if I could do something similar here, that would stimulate the growth of some kind of organizational form. So started off quite slowly, really, and then gradually gained in confidence and started writing more extensive pieces about what was happening in Palestine, partly because it was a way for me to really understand what was happening. You know, so, you know, I'd see that there were events going on at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but all you got was, you know, there was trouble at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. But I started wanting to find out more deeply what was behind that and so on. So I started doing a lot more kind of research into the background of things, and then sharing that through the newsletter. In 2013, I came across the fact that there were already 3 people who used to be in the Scottish Socialist Party who had started having a stall in the high street in Inverness about Palestine, and they were just like putting printouts from things like the Electronic Intifada. They were putting those on their table and making them available to the public. So I started working with them, and one of them was a councillor called Donny Kerr.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so he asked me whether I knew about any motions that had been passed through by councils in Scotland relating to Palestine. And there was one, I think the Kirkcaldy Council had put through a motion. So he took that up himself and decided he wanted to take it through the Highland Council. And we did actually, the Highland Council did in fact pass not the full motion, but half of the motion. So they did actually express support for Palestine, but the second bit, which was about doing something about it, there was the bit that they failed to pass. So that was in 2000, towards the end of 2013. So there was beginning to be a bit more momentum, and people were starting to come to meetings and discuss what we were doing and so on. The following year was 2014, and in the summer of 2014, Israel launched Operation Protective Edge, which was the 50-day campaign against bombing campaign of Gaza. So that really acted as a catalyst to bring people out onto the street. And throughout the summer, there were quite big gatherings of people in Inverness High Street, and we were producing leaflets about it and that kind of thing. So, as I say, we were beginning to gather a bit more momentum, and people were beginning to coordinate more as an organising group. The next phase really was in 2015 when we started organising a film festival, which we did through Eden Court. It was a very good arrangement that we had with Eden Court, actually, because they agreed to hire films on our behalf, and all we did was supply the audience, essentially. So they took the financial risk, and we organised around that. And I managed to get film director Leah Tarachansky, who made a film called On the Side of the Road. I managed to get her to come up to Inverness because she was touring the UK at the time. And with her, we went across to Lochinver with the film, and we also went to Ullapool with the film. So that was quite important in terms of the idea that this wasn't just an Inverness organisation, it was something where we were trying to engage with people across the Highlands, more generally. Yeah. Now, the Highland Palestine Film Festival ran for 4 years, from 2015 to 2019. Is that 4 years or maybe 5 years? So that was quite an important focus of our activity. It really brought people together and to organise around that. And it was a great way of making contact with people, because people would come to the films who weren't already on our contact list, but we could encourage them to join the mailing list through.
Yeah, Eddie and I have found that film great way connecting with people and useful cause. So that's very good, Derek. You're able to do that in your town.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I think is important to say about what we were trying to do with Highland Palestine is we were trying to give people a sense of what was happening in Palestine right here and now. Now, most people are never going to go to Palestine. Some do. There's quite a few people in the Highlands that have been to Palestine, but most people won't do that. And film is obviously one of the best ways to give people some sense of the experience of what it's actually like there. And, we showed quite a big range of films, some documentary films and some, feature films, dramas, and so on and so on. But also in the newsletter, the focus of the newsletter was always to try and give more detailed accounts of what was actually going on in Palestine. I mean, obviously, I got this interest through my friend Ron in what was happening in the South Hebron Hills and the attacks and that were being made on the small communities there. But we also began to focus on other issues like what was happening with children, child prisoners, detainees, prisoners more generally and detainees more generally, what was happening in the education system, what was happening in the refugee camps, what was happening in Jerusalem in particular, because really Jerusalem is kind of a flashpoint for issues relating to Palestine, Israel. So over time, we were kind of building up a more detailed set of information about what the real situation in Palestine is. And we were doing that also by inviting speakers. So, wherever we came across people that had been to Palestine recently or had some, particular insight into what was happening in Palestine, we always, tried to get them to come along and talk about it and share their experiences. So we weren't so focused on the history and side of Palestine, although we still, is obviously still something that we talked about from time to time, but we weren't, I think we've always been much more focused on the contemporary aspect of what's happening in Palestine. So in 2017, we started getting interested in what was happening with Highland Council. Mm-hmm. At that time, there was an initiative called Time to Divest, which came partly through the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign, but not entirely. And they pointed out to us that they'd done some research which showed that Highland Council Pension Fund was holding shares in the US arms company General Dynamics. Mm-hmm. So that gave us a focus for campaigning, which we hadn't really been able to identify up to that point properly.
Yeah. Because no one would know, Derek. Even the people working for the council would not know where their pensions are being invested,
Well, we found that people didn't even know that they were invested. We would talk to people in the street about what was happening, and a lot of people didn't just assume that they put money in into like it was a bank account almost. They didn't realize it was being invested in shares. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it was very good from our point of view that it gave us a point for engaging with people in the street. We had a petition going, we had leaflets, we could talk to people about what was happening to their pension fund if they were in the working for the council. But, in general, people were deeply shocked at the idea that council, local authority, would be investing in that type of thing, in arms companies, So there wasn't, it was a case that most people could really relate to, actually. Mm-hmm. So nevertheless, it was a very prolonged process, because one of the things about the council and its pension fund is that the committee only meets once every 6 months. So if we wrote to the committee about something, we wouldn't it might be another 6 months before there'd be a sort of response to it. Like we at first we didn't really understand very much about how council pension funds work, so we had to really learn quite a lot about how it operates. But it became apparent in 2018 that the key committee was the investment subcommittee, because they actually were the people that dealt directly with where the money was going. Wow. And when we first wrote to the council pension fund committee, We got no response whatsoever, nothing. But in the summer of 2018, we managed somehow or other to get one of our letters to councillors publicised in the Press and Journal. And suddenly we started getting a response because they didn't like the fact that they were getting negative publicity.
Yeah.
But they then kind of pointed out that it was the investment subcommittee that was really dealing with this issue. And we got a message back from them saying that they'd actually had a meeting with the fund manager that was actually holding these shares on behalf of the council. And in their terms, they said that they'd had robust discussions with them. So we weren't quite sure what the robust discussions actually came to, but we thought, oh, well, that's a positive. But we couldn't then find out what had been said until 6 months later, because they didn't publish the minutes of that meeting until the subsequent meeting of the council pension fund, okay, which was March, okay. So it would take from September through to March to be able to see what had been.
These things take such a long time, don't they?
Well, it did. I mean, the delay was just unbelievable. But once we did get to see the minutes, we realised that there was nothing in there that suggested they'd had robust discussion.
Oh no!
But anyway, we now knew where to address our complaints in a way. So we began really to question not just the fact that they were holding these shares in General Dynamics, but more generally what their procedures were that allowed them to hold shares in an arms company in the first place. Because they kept saying that they had they were very careful about what they called environmental, social, and governance issues. Okay, so we came to the conclusion that the procedures for monitoring environmental, social, and governance issues couldn't be very good if it still allowed them to hold £6 to £7 million worth of shares in an arms company, not to mention all the other shares that they held in oil companies, tobacco companies, alcohol companies, etc., etc. Okay.
Just to interrupt you for a minute, Eddie. It was you that had the list of the council, wasn't it?
Yeah. A few years ago, a few of us, just like you said, Derek, we got a freedom of information request, and so we got to study. I think it was like the last 10 years, and like you said, it's all in arms and tobacco and stuff like this, and it's quite shocking. And if memory serves me right, yeah, because we tried papers and stuff, spoke to a few councillors, no one wanted to touch it. And it was the upshot was basically that, they have a fiduciary responsibility.
Exactly.
The pensions are invested in this company, which they literally just give carte blanche to invest in what they want because they're like rated. So that gives them a certain amount of, well, not secrecy, because they'll know what they're doing. But us, the public, all we know is that the council have invested in this company, which is a reputable company, and that's all we need to know. And to me, that was a bit of a block, because then you really couldn't find out exactly why, who, and why, although you could see the amount of money being invested in it.
Yeah. That's exactly how it operates. So they have 7 fund managers that they delegate the responsibility to, essentially. One of the things that was helpful to us, though, was the fact that they did periodically publish a sort of spreadsheet on their website, their pension website, which listed all the shares that they were holding and how much they were worth. So we could track what was happening with their shares in General Dynamics. Obviously, 2020 came along and we were hit by this thing called COVID. So we, that an end to our street activity. And for 6 months, more or less, we didn't really do anything because we weren't really able to meet. But then we started going back on meeting online through Zoom. And through our discussions, we decided that there would be an opportunity in 2021 to tackle this issue head on with the council, because they would have to rewrite their investment strategy, including their statement of investment principles, okay, which is a requirement that they have to revise it every 3 years and publish it, and update it and publish it every 3 years. So we decided that we would target that meeting, which was going to be in March 2021. And what we decided to do was to put together what we called Highland Charter for Responsible Investment. So we produced a document that looked at ways in which other pension funds, for example, manage their ethical investments. We looked at United Nations principles of responsible investment. We looked at this whole issue of fiduciary duty and how much leeway a council would have in relation to that. And we also looked at where the council pension fund was actually investing its funds, and trying to embarrass them or shame them into accepting that their procedures for monitoring.
Just a quick question there. I do remember something specific about reading the whole council spiel on their investment, and I remember reading the very last paragraph, and it does distinctly say that all things are considered, but ultimately we have a fiduciary responsibility. It's basically a business, it's a company, isn't it? So it's like you said, we literally are appealing to them to try to shame them, because the actual model that they have, it can override all of our endeavors.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is not peculiar to Highland Council. This is all councils, essentially. But the Palestine Solidarity Campaign have, from time to time, taken court cases where they've tried to challenge some of the rulings in relation to pension funds, and they have shown that pension fund committees do have a degree of discretion about where they invest. I mean, when they say, well, this is just we're just following our fiduciary duty, you have to ask yourself, well, how did you manage to end up with these funds invested in General Dynamics in the first place?
High returns, Derek. High returns. They give very high returns. I remember the figures.
Well, it turned out actually that wasn't entirely the case. But I'll just follow. So we decided to put together this thing called the Highland Charter for Responsible Investment. Yeah. So we decided that we would put together this document exploring the legal position that pension funds operate within, pointing out that there were a lot of discussions going on about the ethics of investment, particularly in relation to the future shape of economies and whether or not the kind of legacy investments that councils have, which are in all of these things that we've identified, like tobacco and alcohol and coal mining and blah, 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 whether these have actually got a future. and whether they might actually end up being what they call stranded investments. So there are some chinks in the armor of this system, but they're not particularly. They are just chinks, basically. Anyway, we decided that we would try and enroll the support of other groups in the area and see whether we could get other people to sign up to this charter for responsible investment. And we did manage to get the support of about 20 different groups across the Highlands, including, green organisations that have got a green agenda and so on. Now, what happened then was that when it came to the meeting at which this statement of investment principles was going to be discussed, they ended up debating these issues for over an hour. Now, that is absolutely extraordinary. I mean, if you look at most of the meetings of the Pension Fund Committee, everything goes through on the nod. The officials produce a document. They say it has no consequences. All those in favour, and it just goes through. So the fact that they spent quite a lot of time actually discussing this, that two of the councillors raised the question about investments in general dynamics, and there was quite a debate. That was really an achievement in itself. And,
Wow.
it was probably the most exciting thing that has ever happened to the people of the pension committee. Anyway, unbeknownst to us, there'd actually been a meeting of the investment subcommittee a couple of weeks before that meeting of the full committee, where they'd made a very important decision. But they didn't tell us until the following September, when the minutes of that meeting were finally released. And the upshot of it was that they had decided that to disinvest, not just from General Dynamics, but from the fund manager that was holding shares in General Dynamics, which was a company called Pireford.
Uh-huh.
Now, as I said, there were 7 different fund managers managing the fund, and the fund itself is worth close to £2 billion. So the investment in Pireford was worth £300 million, and they took the lot out of Pireford and reinvested it in 2 funds that they considered to be more ethically and socially responsible, not on the grounds that they were ethically and socially responsible, but on the grounds that they were offering a better return than Pireford, because Pireford was investing in these sort of middle of the road shares that had a sort of steady return over a long period, but were not performing particularly well. And that was actually one of the things that we'd managed to identify and point out to the council, that there were other funds that were more that were giving a better return. So that was in September of 2021. But it then took a further 2 years before that decision was actually finalised. Because it's quite a complicated thing to take £300 million out of a fund and reinvest it somewhere else.
Gotcha.
Finally, we did actually get confirmation at the end of 2022 that they no longer held shares in General Dynamics. So that took the best part of 5 years to get there. So that
Wow.
was, yeah. Um,
It's an encouraging story to hear, Derek. You don't often hear of successes like that.
no, well,
No.
I mean, we did feel as though, I personally felt as though I was banging my head against a brick wall most of the time, really. I've heard every single excuse you could imagine, really. But, of course, so that brought us into the beginning of 2023, and we hadn't really managed to recover properly from COVID by that point, because we'd for 2 years more or less, we'd had to stop holding any street events, so we were just really beginning to get ourselves back together again when October the 7th happened.
Yeah.
So we weren't very well prepared in a way to respond to that, but luckily we did. And I mean, this past year has been extraordinary, really. The number of people that have become active in the movement has just grown massively. And I think what it's shown me, at least, is that all that work trying to, build up a contact list and have a newsletter that went out to people, in which people had begun to respect, did play quite an important part in the way in which then people came together since October, But I mean, now Highland Palestine is something completely unlike what it was before. It's just gone in a completely new dimension, really, which is fantastic as far as I'm concerned. So yeah.
Yeah, 'cause it's something that you started so many years ago from a small idea going into what's today. It's absolutely fantastic what you've done, Derek.
Well, I don't put it all down to me, but I mean, there's lots of people been involved over the years in making it work, But it was, I suppose, my mad idea. It wasn't so mad because it was something I'd seen worked when we had the Highland Coalition for Justice Not War. That doing a sort of newsletter was a way of bringing people together, really. And so that was kind of the nucleus of it, in a way. But I mean, now, Highland Palestine, we've got the newsletter, we've got the Facebook page, we've got a website, we've got Instagram, we've got Twitter, we've got YouTube channel. I mean, this on things.
All that, is it you?
These are things I could only have dreamt about in we're like a media empire.
So I just wanted, we talk about the vigils you've been having. What numbers have you? What's the numbers been like?
Well, most recently, I think we're getting regularly 30 to 40 people outside the townhouse every week. But that's down a lot from the initial surge of support. I mean, in October, November last year, we had something like 300 people gathering. But that's impossible, really, to sustain on that level, really. But there's now, quite a core of people that come out every Saturday and
The hardcore ones, yeah.
have a presence on the street, and not necessarily the people that were there in the first place. And it changes. So, I mean, the real test, I thought, was the march that we had, which was organised partly by Highland Palestine people and also this other group Highland Hearts for Palestine, which is a group of women that came together to raise funds for Salim, the doctor at Regmore. And they've been fantastic. I mean, they've really been amazing what they've done. But that was a very big demonstration in October, on October the 5th. I think there were at least 500 people on the street.
Oh,
So that
Inverness, that's amazing.
it is. I mean, it's the bigger than any other similar demonstration I can think of, really. And it was great because it was people all of every kind, really. There were, people with prams and babies and pensioners and everybody in between, really, so that was fantastic, I thought. But as I say, it's not, that's the other people that are doing that, not me. And that's amazing that other people have come in and sort of taken it over, really, which is as it should be.
Yeah, the next generation.
Yeah.
So,
Could you?
sorry.
I was just going to say, Derek, could you ever imagine? I mean, I'm sure you could, but to what degree did you, or could you have imagined the profound effect, the Palestinian situation would have right now, as you mentioned earlier, in the contemporary context?
Well, I think back to last September, not the September that's gone, the September before October the 7th. And I went round with the Highlands with Najib Joe Hakim, a Palestinian American photographer, and did a number of meetings in Cromarty, Ullapool, Helmsdale, and so on. And, we got about 30 people along to meetings. And at the time, I was beginning to think this is really quite hard work, getting people to listen to what's happening. And it did seem as though debate about Palestine had just been closed down, essentially. I mean, the whole sort of bashing of people as for being anti-Semitic had quite a big effect, I mean, that was a direct outcome of the 2014 Operation Protective Edge, because what that showed to me was that Israel has these two different kinds of power. It has hard power, the military power, which has been deploying over the past year, but it also had this other kind of power, which was this sort of soft power, the ability to control the narrative and present itself as the victim and so on. And it became apparent to me that the two things are in contradiction with each other, because 2014 gave birth to a massive global opposition to what was happening to the people of Gaza, which meant that Israel lost ground massively on that sort of ideological front. And that's why they then launched this campaign to suppress the pro-Palestinian movement. And it's quite deliberate and concerted. I mean, they held a conference in 2015 where they decided to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Association definition of anti-Semitism as a way of trying to identifying that people were as being anti-Semitic when they were simply criticizing Israel. So that certainly had an effect. But the way I looked at that was that although it was quite disruptive and disturbing in lots of ways. I saw it as a sign of weakness.
Mm.
Thought, the more they're doing this, the weaker they are, really. And I think that's been the case in the past year, that, they've used their military capability, or really their sort of America's military capability, massively, and, being able to inflict massive destruction on Gaza, and now on Lebanon, and attacking Iran and so on. But the more they do it, the more they lose ground in public opinion. And I don't see that changing, personally. I think that this has been a moment of real awakening, particularly among younger people, who've been, talking to each other on Instagram and TikTok and so on. And they're not fooled. They're not being gaslighted, because they can see for themselves what is happening. And the degree of revulsion it's engendered towards Israel, I don't see how Israel is ever going to recover from that, personally. I don't know, where that will lead politically, but I think it makes they are now a pariah state in the eyes of, millions of people across the world, I would say.
I totally agree. I totally agree with that. Like you said, ideologically, they've become weaker. But I mean, but there's also a part as well that's not much discussed here. What do you think about? I mean, Israel, they're the ninth biggest exporters of weaponry, and they do a lot of tech stuff, as you know. I'm watching a podcast with Professor Anthony Lowenstein, I think his name is, and the books is Palestine as a laboratory, which is very, very true, because you see Israel, selling arms, selling tech equipment to Hungary, Austria, all the far right wing. They go everywhere, and they don't care who they sell to. So you can say, hence, all this technology and stuff is helping them do their ethnic cleansing, pretty well. But at the same time, they're making a lot of money and a lot of influence and a lot of admiration, because as you know, there's a lot of countries, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of rulers wherever they are, America, UK, the same, where, we are looking, with admiration, with, wanting this technology. I mean, I heard as well, from a couple of sources, the Cradle, I think, as well, which is a good source. And they were saying that there's already discussions that have been had by America and the UK and others in Europe, who have said, when all this is said and done, they're going to have American troops, and the UK said they'll back them as well, to have literally troops in Palestine, which equate to guards, prison guards. And what they're calling them, and what the British, I can't remember, it was someone in the British establishment called, what was it? Hamas-free gated communities.
Right.
I mean, honestly, you couldn't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
It's frightening.
I think, I think we're entering into a new era.
Mm-hmm.
The battle lines are being redrawn. One aspect of that is the status of international law, and whether the system that was created post the Second World War still has any validity whatsoever. Because it's quite clear that Israel has dismantled it, essentially, by defying it and being completely unaccountable under that system. Now, this is happening in a context where that system underpinned what was kind of the West's form of a kind of self-regard, that, we are the ones that have created this wonderful system, or this liberal system of legality and so on. that is now set against the rise of China and Russia and the BRICS.
Yeah.
And the American hegemony is losing its grip globally. So this is a kind of, I think,
We're hoping a can of worms there.
we're seeing a reshaping of global politics for the next
Yes.
100 years, really.
I totally agree with you there. It's happening in front of our eyes.
Yeah.
And America, as it was, as they say, it was a unipolar world when America was on top back until quite recently. But, Russia's not defeated. China's on the rise. The world is changing. Everyone's, as you said, gravitating towards BRICS, the G20 or the G7. The United Nations, like you quite rightly pointed out, is becoming obsolete before our very eyes. And, America, rather than try to, sue for peace, or the UK, let's try to all work together. It's like, no, let's have a big scramble and a big fight. And we've still got America would say they're still militarily the strongest in the world, which they are. But how many fronts are they going to fight on, like Israel? It's not possible, is it? It's really just not even possible.
Just going to interrupt you there and just keeping an eye on the time there.
Yeah.
So just one more quick question, Derek. Just quickly, why is it important for people in the Highlands to have solidarity with the Palestinians?
I think instinctively people in the Highlands do have solidarity with the Palestinians, because there's so much about Highland history that is similar in so many ways to what has happened in Palestine. The dispossession of land by a more powerful group is, you can see very direct correlations between the clearance period in the Highlands and what's happening today in Palestine. If we don't support as humanity the kind of oppressed groups like the Palestinians, then we are creating a world in which injustice and oppression has gained the upper hand, and we can't allow that to happen. I mean, obviously it's an ongoing struggle, but we have to constantly combat that. That's our duty, really, isn't it? That we have to bear witness to this and do what we can to challenge this drift towards an oppressive future.
Absolutely. Did you see? Sorry, Murray. Derek? Did you see? It was Rudy Giuliani. Do you remember he was the mayor of New York? I don't know if he still is.
No.
No, he's not. Well, I know he's in Trump's. He's in Trump's group, isn't he? He was addressed. Did you see him just a few days ago? He was addressing 25,000 Trump supporters, and he was shouting out, and he reiterated it a few times. Palestinians from the age of 2 are taught how to kill Americans.
Sure.
And the language, honest to God, it was. We might as well have been listening to Adolf Hitler. Yeah. And then when you look, our government here, Labour, David Lammy saying it's not a genocide because literally not enough people have died, completely ignoring the United Nations description of what genocide is. We are living in a topsy-turvy land, and it's a big fight, Derek. And I just want to say thank you very much, personally, for keeping up that fight for all these years. It's like you said, it's a very, very hard task and banging your head against the wall. So thank you very, very much.
Well, some of it's fun, actually, as well.
Yeah, the small victories. Yeah, let's hope for some more.
Well,
thanks for talking to us, Derek.
Not at all, and thank you for inviting me along.
No.
Okay.
We'll look forward to an excellent meeting with Mazin and Jesse in a few weeks' time.
Yeah, cool.
Yes.
Look forward to that very much indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you, Derek. You too.
Great.
Thanks, Eric.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.